Welcome to Michigan Reimagined, presented by TA Forsberg and Wagoner Financial. And here's your host, Chris Buck.
So affordable housing is crucial for attracting and retaining and growing a workforce. Yet affordability is declining nationwide. So here to discuss it, part 2 of a housing conversation. And I encourage you to listen to part 1 if you're finding this independent to lay the foundation. But we've got a fantastic and impressive panel of experts today, including the President of TA Forsberg, Mr. Brent Forsberg, Chief Operating Officer for LEAP, the Lansing Economic Area Partnership, Keith Lambert, Secretary Treasurer of the Michigan Laborers District Council, Alex Zurek, and from Richmond Capital, we have the Vice President of Investor Relations, Mike Ibarra. Thanks for coming back for the second half of this great conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Great to be back.
Here.
So we've already discussed basically why we need housing, that we need housing, but we just started talking about solutions to the problems that we're facing. And one of those big problems is the economics.
Yeah.
In today's climate, how on earth do you build housing in mass with all of the headwinds that we face? So, I'd like to kick it over to you, Alex, and maybe Mike, to talk about solutions we have to kind of bridge the gap financially on how this is all going to happen.
Sure thing. So let me start out by talking about our pension fund. We have a defined benefit pension fund. We've paid out over $1 billion in the state of Michigan to our members who are retired, and we're very proud of that. The fund currently is about $1.6 billion, depending on the market. We try to get Mike to do a better job, but
wow, that's why you're on the phone.
But obviously, we work with a consultant and a board, and one of the board's main drivers is they like to see return on investment. And obviously, that's not just making money. We like to make a difference in the community as well if we can get that benefit. And the government does have some stipulations that say we can do an investment if it's prudent, and especially if there's a social component. As long as everything else is equal, you can use the social component. And I won't get on social governance and all that. I don't know where everybody is on that. But, we want to try to do the best for our members and make the best investment. And the way we see it, if we can use our money, our investment money, to create projects for our members and for future members, it's good for everybody.
So you have money to place
Correct.
into investments that are going to bring a return. And these housing projects are a place for you to do that. And it's metaphorically hand in glove.
Correct.
With
Yep.
with the community that you serve.
Yeah, and I would say if you went back on a lot of funds and endowments and that, it used to be you would do a 70-30 mix or any variation from that. You'd have some stocks, you'd have some bond exposure. And obviously the financial markets have gotten a little more complex. You have private equity deals, you have PPE, private-public partnerships where everybody partners up, which I think is good because it puts everybody in the game. And that's kind of what we're thinking about with Brent is, it's three-legged stool. We got 3 people, 3 groups all working together for one common goal.
Right?
Absolutely.
So, and Mike, what do you have to say about your role in that?
Yeah, so let me add to that. So we work with organizations like Alex's pension plans across the country, and basically we have several obligations. First of all, we're a fiduciary, and you'll hear that term a lot relative to investments. That means we have as our number one job the care of the assets that are given to us to use and work with these various programs, and we take that very, very seriously. It's something we're not going to do something that's going to put these dollars at risk because, as Alex said, these are the benefits and ultimately the retirement of their working men and women in their organization. Second thing is we look for opportunities that are produce that kind of return that the investors are looking for, and that have a backdrop of safety. And the particular programs that we work with, specifically for affordable housing, provide through a bond vehicle. Alex mentioned sort of the bond structures, an opportunity for them to invest in the housing directly as a holder of those housing bonds, and the bonds that we issue are all backed by the federal government. So there's no risk in default. That means for the investors, they are protected in the event of some unforeseen circumstance. And for the developer, they're given an opportunity to take their projects from construction or rehabilitation all the way through long-term financing at incredibly competitive rates that are backed by the federal government, so that they can have the certainty that their projects can be financed on a timely basis and held for a long period of time without risk of financial ups and downs that go along in the marketplace. And so in that context, again, we gather money from investors like Alex's, and then we work with a team led by folks like Brent to build these opportunities in the communities, finance them directly so that they can be completed and then held over a long period of time to the benefit of the community. And the money that's coming from that is coming from local sources. It's coming from folks like Alex's pension plan, so that we put that money right back into the community where it was built and should reside.
And that was a really great explanation. As a layperson, Brent, maybe you can put a little icing on the cake on that. Is that, you talk about if you're going to do a 300-unit mixed-use or a multifamily housing project, and you're putting together your capital stack, right? The money that you need to put in order to build the darn thing, right? And hopefully make money. How creative or different is it to have this component as a part of your capital stack than what you've traditionally been able to get?
Well, the important part is that this is connecting local capital to local projects.
Right.
So that's what's a little bit different, right? We've kind of had this nationalization of our banking system over the last 80 years. And so now it's still using the same mechanisms, but we're reconnecting back locally. And what Alex had said on the last show, I think, was so important and just resonated with me, that you can drive by and say, I built that.
Right.
And that's the important piece of this, is that people in the community can say, my union, my company invested in this, but I also built that. And that's the important piece. And this comes back to how I met Mike in my master's program in real estate and the built environment years ago. And he was one of the practitioners that spoke regularly.
Okay.
And he brings up this idea of regenerative capital. And it was something that I looked at after 20 years in my career at that point, we've got to find ways to do things better. And this is what I've always been looking at, and you've heard me talk about before.
Absolutely, yes.
And Mike was one of the key guys that was showing what some of these tools were that are out there, and this is one of them, and understanding that when we're looking at it, there's 4 forms of capital, right? And depending on your talk, there's 4 or 5, but the important ones are, we have this idea of the social capital, and this is what we're talking about here. The capital of people coming together with ideas to create that better place where they are, to build the built environment that we're in, but also protect the ecological capital that we build it within, because those are our resources that have to grow over time, and then using a financial capital tool that allows all of this to tie together. So that's how this whole thing kind of works as a group, where what we call that holistic approach. And then the regenerative piece is that over time we're able to keep reinvesting and keep building our communities, because the people that are there have set their roots down, they've made the connection, and it attracts more. And this comes into with the business attraction for the state, where I feel we can really have a competitive advantage, because I know I'm biased, being in Michigan my whole life, but I think we're farther ahead on this than a lot of other places are. Now, maybe there's some more investment going in, but I really think we're tying this together better than a lot of other states are. And Mike and Keith can speak to that probably a little better than I can, but it's here. And what this program's doing is building this, and we're excited to be a part of launching one of these.
Mike, do you mind if I jump in one quick minute? And Mike, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but would you mind maybe just doing a brief overview of that project we have in Grand Rapids? Because I think that's a real world case.
Well, actually, let's talk more generically about products typically, because I think we'll see 2 kinds of them. And the Grand Rapids project, I'll start with that. That actually came to us through an entity that's based in Illinois. It was a project with a development organization that was seeking investment capital, seeking construction capital, and et cetera. The interesting thing is they'd never worked with unions before, and we made it really clear that we needed the quality of the team to be up to our expectations. That was part of the deal. So we actually introduced the parties and said, we'd be happy to talk about financing this vehicle. There's going to be a couple of unions at the table. One of my colleagues brought everybody literally to the table to discuss about how this might come together, et cetera. And we're now in the process of finalizing the lending arrangements around that project, so that thing will be built from the ground up. It's a typical story, and again, this is local dollars getting invested back into the local communities for the purposes of expanding the housing stock. More broadly, and there's one thing we haven't talked about, is the restoration of existing housing. In the earlier show, Brent talked about the age of the housing stock across the country. So much of our housing stock is, about 80% of it, predates some of us. But I mean, it's been there for quite some time. That housing stock can't go away, and we can't allow it to deteriorate. So at the same time, we're trying to make investments in those entities, those vehicles, so that those could be properly restored and brought back into the marketplace as something that we would all be proud to both live in and participate in. We're doing a number of those projects around the country as well. But I think for the developer that came to the Grand Rapids project, for the other things that Brent is working on, et cetera, the common denominator right now, especially with the cost of money, is how do I get this thing built and sustain it over a long period of time on numbers that allow me to keep this project affordable to the renter or to the buyer. And that requires really creative financing vehicles that allow them to sort of get that thing done. And that's what we do ultimately. We have the ability to be so much more flexible than traditional banking industries, et cetera, although we work with banks, to try and just figure out a way to make these projects financially work, with the goal of being that they can be built and kept affordable for long periods of time.
I would like to add one thing to that also, and Mike did touch on it, but currently that property has a large commercial factory that was on it. And I'll just say briefly, I mean, I've been by the project. It's an eyesore, right?
Blight. Yeah.
It's blight, right? And we all know we have a number of factories in all across Michigan. So essentially, we're tearing down that building, we're putting up affordable housing.
Yeah.
Which is going to be great for the
community. Good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. A lot of what we're seeing too is really transforming these communities to something that has just really become, a sad part of the community, and is something that's going to become a new vibrant, center for continued economic growth. Really, really important part of what we do.
Yeah, I think most people are familiar with the term now walkability, right? We understand that we want places that we want a good experience in, and that we want to go to discover things, to have public space, to make connections with people. And that's what housing does. And it makes that so that's a 24/7, right? Because you have the business in areas that have been there for a while, but we kind of got away from that post-World War II, where all of that used to be connected together, and we're really just kind of going back to those older models and of how we build. And that's what's exciting here, and taking an area that has been in blight and putting it into something that's going to have housing that's connected with those businesses. That's exciting to me, and that's community building 101 that makes Michigan great.
Yep. So it seems like we've got a lot of the right players at the table. There's some creative processes to make these things pencil. You mentioned in the other show about housing TIF. Can you talk a little bit about that tool and any other tools? I know the state and the MEDC have like some community development funds. I mean, nobody's got the corpus of cash to be able to fill every gap for every house that needs to be built. But talk about the tools that are out there, and then who else needs to get to this conversation to really get us across the finish line.
So it's been really exciting to me being in housing the last couple of years that housing is now becoming one of the primary tools of economic development for a region. That transportation, childcare, access to healthy foods, kind of all of it coming together. But, this housing piece of it is so important. And the state is really taking some good efforts, one of them being if the housing is aligned with the local workforce, and that goes up to 120% adjusted median income for an area. There's tools available now that some of the taxes can go back to help with the financing of the gap. Now, with interest rates doing what they've done in the last 24 to 36 months, it's made it harder for those tools to work, and that's where it's important now to get even more creative with groups like Alex and what Richmond's doing to how do we kind of backfill this? So it starts with this idea that we've got these tools that the state's put together. From the MEDC side, they've been working with the Re-Emerging Developer initiative that they're working on, and that's kind of rebuilding this ecosystem of people that can deploy these tools and deploy the housing around the state, and that's something that my company's working on, is how do we help build that network for the people that can work on the entitlements and things, and then working with Alex to how can we bring the workforce along with it. And then for who else needs to be at the table, the important thing to think about is the GDP and the potential growth for our communities is directly tied to our workforce. And getting these businesses that are coming in to the table and understand, okay, that housing is an economic driver for you too and helps your bottom line. And how can we get even more creative with these companies that come in and with other tools that are out there and foundations that are available to say, okay, what can we do to build this over time? And what can we do that we know there's going to be issues 5, 10, 15 years that we're not foreseeing now? So how do we set up a system that as we're building all of this, that we can put capacity in for money to be available in the future to handle whatever the contemporary issues moving forward? And that's something that I think that Michigan can really be on the forefront of, is understanding that by bringing these large companies in and bringing in the financing tools that they have too, how do we kind of package this all together to make it something that creates greater economic, that multiplier that Mike talked about in the previous show? How do we move that forward through the entire ecosystem that we're building?
Yeah, I think, the creativity of capital overall is really important. LEAP looks to be, for the Lansing region, a social capital engine and connector, and similarly with financial capital. But a lot of it is on the private sector to kind of figure out where are those sources. And I love the whole idea of using pension funds differently, using local foundations that have tremendous assets that are kind of sitting in your typical mutual funds and not being deployed locally, even though these are mission-oriented groups that want to support the community in either a philanthropic way or a self-motivation, make the community better, that produces more revenue for what we do. So we see a lot of groups like that, and I love the creative thinking there. I see LEAP's role as, we have to activate municipalities around planning and zoning and entitlements. We have to have them talk to their neighbors and create this sort of landing pad, if you will, where, okay, there's this creative private sector, the juices are flowing, there's all sorts of money now that can be deployed, but we still need that economic toolbox that Brent talked about, which has totally been revamped by the Housing Development Authority, MISTA, as well as the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, MEDC. But the challenge is it's new and people don't know how to use it, both the development community as well as those municipal partners. So that's really where LEAP is trying to step in across the Tri-County, particularly with Ingham County and Clinton County, where we serve as their economic development departments, to say, look, Community X, we want to come in and help make this thing housing TIF, missing middle grant, low interest loan. Like, how do we stack these things so this creative capital that wants to be deployed here can actually be deployed here? And we are working with like a half dozen projects right now where they're at some stage of, here's the gap, here's the tools that we have currently, how can we get over the hump to actually, get shovels in the ground and get this thing built? And that's the linchpin, I think, with a lot of what we're trying to do. But there is so much energy and new tools, so there's a lot of progress, but there still is the economics are difficult, even with all that.
Yeah. I'll try and be brief here, but several things I want to comment. First of all, it's really important that you've got an advocate like LEAP to go out and really speak to all these different factors, because somebody out there needs to be able to sort of help connect all the dots on things, and it sounds like that's a role that you're playing, and that's exceptional. Second thing is, one of the things that I see as a common mistake, money will come to bear, whether through state programs or federal programs, et cetera, and the natural reaction is, let's just go invest it. And what I'm trying to counsel people to say is, well, wait a minute, before you just spend money on buying land or investing in specific projects, what about creating a more long-term sustainable fund type vehicle that can recycle that money multiple times, and that way you don't have to go back to the taxpayers or to others to re-raise money. One of the beauties about the program that we utilize that we're working with Alex on, and Alex and many others on, is because of the nature of the program, we invest in these projects when they become stable and mature. We actually can turn that investment into a bond, sell it in the public market for the benefit of the investors, and then recycle that money back into the community again. So we tell investors like Alex's, hey, if you invest, oftentimes $1 invested will be the equivalent of $4 or $5 over 10 years, because we build things, stabilize them, sell the bonds in the marketplace, recycle that money, and go again. So we can really get leverage out of those programs. Michigan's really interesting and unique as a pension fund environment because so many of the pension funds are locally grounded, whether they be in cities or other municipalities. There's an opportunity there. And I know that a lot of them aren't that big, but there's an opportunity there collectively for them to look at the kind of investments that can improve all of their local economies on a very localized basis. And one of the things I think people miss when you make this kind of investment is that these are engines that drive further growth. So if you make an investment in your own community in housing or other programs like it, that creates a broader tax base. It creates revenue streams, both publicly and privately, that then become additional sources of capital. So it's not just how you place the money, it's how we think more long-term about how do we recycle that money, use it, over and over again so that we don't have to go back to the well forever. Last thing I want to comment on is the cost of money right now. Yes, we've all seen the interest rates come up. Fortunately, we think they're going to come down to some degree this year. But one of the things we've been able to do is help people creatively structure deals in terms that are way better than what they probably would otherwise get a hold of. We did a project just now. We quoted the developer has been quoted about a 6 and an 8 cost of money from a bank. We were able to bring that in about 5 1/4. So a very, very big discount, and that's the difference between that project happening and not happening.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And while we're talking about how all the money works, I want to give a nod to my other title sponsor. And I want to say, when it comes to managing your finances and planning for your future, I suggest you contact my friends at Wagoner Financial. Whether you're just getting started, getting ready to retire, or anywhere in between, Wagoner Financial can help you make smart financial decisions. Don't navigate complex problems on your own. Wagoner has the expertise to help you feel confident that you're making the right financial choices. Contact an advisor by calling 517-853-3367 or visit their website at wagoner-financial.com. Don't forget the hyphen, or you're going to find the wrong guy. Anyway, so so that all makes sense to me, and I understand. It feels good, feels right, noble pursuits, effective tools, all that kind of stuff. What's the practical application of that, and how do you kind of broadcast that that's happening to get the feels that we just kind of unpacked in that last bit of the conversation, right? So how does that get applied, and then how do you fan the flames of that?
That's why we're here.
Yeah. Right.
But in all seriousness, this is just starting to roll out, and that's the exciting part. So the housing plan, you brought up that we can't wait while these pieces are coming together, and that's what we're doing as a group. Is we're saying, okay, we know we're moving in this direction. We've got tools. We're working to deploy them right now. The LIUNA's already deployed with Richmond on a project that's super exciting because that's right here in our state. So it's happening right now. And then from the plan side, what we're working on, and there's a very broad, comprehensive plan, anywhere from homeless to all types of housing. And I am a kind of a one-trick pony on it. I'm on the new housing stock committee. I know that's going to shock everybody. But and my focus really is understanding that we've got this misalignment happening in the workforce housing right now. So what we're doing is going across and looking at the entire housing stock across the Tri-County area. And we're looking at other areas in the state too, because this all rhymes, and understanding, and if we all work together across these regions, we can address these issues together. So first thing we're doing is aligning, okay, what's our wage distribution in the area? Working with groups like LEAP to say, okay, what are the companies that are coming in? Working with the trade unions to say, okay, what do we have to do to be competitive to keep the workforce here? And then say, this is the housing stock that we have on the ground. This is what it costs to build. And then reset that baseline, what that is to move forward. And that's the next step that I'm working on the regional plan right now, is getting this baseline done. And then at the same time, we're working together to say, okay, we know we've got workforce development that can be done. We know we need housing stock. So we're working with some of the new codes and working across housing technologies to say, let's try a few of these, and we're trying a few houses right now, and then we're going to be looking at a multifamily project here shortly that will come out, that we're going to combine these tools together. So it's back to that hyper-local approach, working with the workforce, working with the financing mechanisms, but then also on that broader approach, putting together that baseline that's coming out, that's done, and then that will align with where's the infrastructure. Then working with MEDC's redevelopment ready community project, who's already put the zoning and things in place that allow housing to be put faster. Working with the emerging developer program to say, okay, who's putting together investment groups on this? And then tying it back into these larger companies that say, okay, we need 1,000 workers coming into this area. We know that there's a housing deficit shortage of X amount. Now we can start to get to numbers quickly that's needed. So that's how kind of all these pieces begin to tie together as these plans come in, and then using things like what is the cost of money and financing that comes into it to adjust that final dynamic for the housing price.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of data analysis and mapping, GIS mapping related to where our jobs and investment happening. You know, well, what if we won today, but then also projecting out, we know this site's going to be a focus, and that's a 3 to 5 year. That's a 3 to 5 year. You know, probably 1,000 jobs there max. You know, what is the likely highest and best use of these properties? And then we're overlaying that with the current zoning, future land use across the entire Tri-County, and in an interactive type way. And then we're hoping to have a publicly facing version of that in the next few months even. So to inform the plan as it's finalized, but to also help developers and municipalities understand, like, this is what makes sense, right? Density is stacked into that. Where does it make sense to add density? Are people having intelligent conversations about all those things, township by township, let's say, right? And do they know what the township next door is doing? Is there good collaboration there? So we just have so many local units that make decisions on different things, and there's not always a collective or regional understanding. And that's another gap that LEAP's trying to help fill, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page about, you know, if the community doesn't want growth, fine. You know, it's almost like opt-in, opt-out of growing at this point in time, and that's okay. You know, some communities they want to stay with their rural character, and that's what they want to be into the future. And so be it, right? But we have to understand, like, who is a willing participant in bringing new jobs and investment in, who wants to see new multifamily housing,
right?
You know, and if you don't, then, you know, your neighbors are going to pass you by in different ways, and that's going to be the reality. So we have to keep this region competitive, and that's definitely our prerogative.
I was going to ask you who. And you already started down that road. So is there anyone that's kind of not on board with this? Are there naysayers or people thinking that this is, I don't know, the wrong path? I mean, I hearing you talk about municipalities, certainly you need to go to them and say, you know, here's where things are kind of headed. Here's what we think is needed. If we come to you with one of these types of projects, we want you to see it coming and have a plan for us to either incorporate that or, like you said, opt out. But are there... Brent, do you have competitors that are kind of saying, Brent's full of hooey, we need to go down a different... I mean, I don't know. How does that all look?
Well, I mean, it's tough because our goal has always been, and one thing that my company did years ago is, you know what, there's always been this tension of growth and not growth in communities because it's scary, right? I mean, development is a change agent. So at the end of the day, even if people don't like it, sometimes they'd rather have it be left alone than deal with what the unknown is moving forward. So that's one thing that we've looked at where we're trying to change what this conversation is. And you look at the communities that grew from the 70s forward. They really went to this kind of centralization metropolitan area. That's really hard to do in Michigan because we're a home rule state. So take our Tri-County area where there's 78 taxable forms of government in our 3 counties. So, and that's good or bad because now what that's allowing is for the growth, if you consider the growth that happened over the last 40 years, it was bad because that was the metrics that it was based on was these larger, large growth for communities. Yeah. But now is it? I mean, when we look at this chance to really build these hyper-local areas for people to be a part of, now the communities can do it at this hyper-local level. And this is something that I think is going to be our advantage as we move into the mid-century 21st economy of the United States. And people are able to have these conversations locally and have control locally. So if they've got infrastructure, if they want growth, then those communities can step up, and communities that don't necessarily want that are able to have that conversation locally as well. So yes, it makes it harder because it's harder to govern at that hyper-local level and have things build and build that maybe centralized culture and message. But at the same time, working and building these local groups, starting with the individual that are in the community saying, here's the benefit to you. Now we can make that conversation more meaningful and something that I think can grow in a way that we haven't seen since World War II in the United States.
I would agree with Brent's point. I mean, and I'm not trying to pick on any one community, but I'll just say, if you take Traverse City, right? Traverse City, a very nice place. But the mantra in Traverse City was always, come see the Bay, work for half the pay. And as you go up there now, right, there's help wanted signs all over. Because the big issue is nobody can afford to live there. So that's something that they need to address. I mean, if you want people to work at Starbucks and the restaurants and everywhere else, there has to be a place to live. They can't drive 2 hours to work every day.
Yeah.
And that's got to be part of the decision.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alex.
No, I'm done. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say it's interesting. There's a common misperception oftentimes about development and growth, and people tend to focus on, gee, there's going to be more traffic, more noise, quality of life is going to go down, et cetera. And then as people start talking about affordability, people have a preconceived notion of what that means. The reality is, and the COVID pandemic should have helped teach us this, you really need all quality of those workers in your community, whether they're nurses, doctors, firefighters, police officers, healthcare workers, whatever the case may be. The reality is they can't be driving from one distant location to their workplaces or to another distant location, because that's the only way they can afford to live in something that works for them. We have to have those people embedded in our communities, because they are part of the safety net, they're part of the community, they're part of what makes for a healthy community. And so for those who would say, gee, we don't want to grow, I think I would encourage them to understand what having that diverse population of people in their own community really means. Mm-hmm. So if we struggle with issues in the future, you've got the resources built into your own community to try and better cope with some of those things. And frankly, I'd love to have firefighters in my neighborhood and police officers in my neighborhood, et cetera, because those are the people who are making our world a better place, and they need affordability in their housing as well.
And we need broader awareness. LEAP and MEDC are undergoing broader public education around a lot of different topics, but this is a big part of it, about how to embrace economic development, what it means. The reality is, change is the only constant, right? Right. There is no not changing, and there's only relative decline if you do nothing. Even in rural small communities, if there's not reinvestment into the building stocks, into the farms, into the farm equipment, you will go back there in 10 years and it will have declined. And that will have very real, tangible economic conditions. More people leaving, less, the schools declining, healthcare declining. It won't be good for anybody. So I think that's helping to people understand, managed growth is a good thing. At sustained levels, it can be marginal even. But what does that mean for you? What is the interest, and how can business attraction, investment attraction support that? And interlocal cooperation is more important than ever. With all those different municipalities, cities, even small cities, they're all landlocked. Right, and they can only grow by 425 or some sort of agreement whereby their utilities and assets are expanded into surrounding townships and things. So we're having a lot of conversations like that, and there's a lot of work to be done. But our region just has been sleepy. We haven't had a lot of growth, so people are easily shocked, I would say, out there in the general public. Even when they're 2 or 3 minutes away from an interstate, they think they're in a super rural, even though they're 10 minutes away from MSU and Michigan State, Michigan State as well as capital city. So some of that is just helping people understand kind of how they fit into the broader region. And it's not always easy. It can be difficult conversations with folks, but I think it's important for our region to continue to grow and continue to build good housing for people, which is critical.
And for me, it starts with one question. What is the experience we want in our communities for the next 1, 3, 5, 10, 20 years? Right. And start there, and then we can work backwards into what are the correct tools that we need to use to get there.
Consensus there.
And this helps bring home the whole notion of why this needs to be led locally. Mm-hmm. For too often in our country, we'll see distant investors come in with distant capital. They'll say, "Gee, wouldn't it be great to build this big project everybody's going to benefit?" But there really is no local leadership associated with that decision, and someone that's miles away can't really make a decision as to how best it's going to fit into the community's vision of itself and future plan. So we started the first discussion on this about why the team and the effort that Brent and Alex are leading is so important. We've sort of come full circle now and talked about, hey, if we're going to do growth, it really should be community based. It should fit the long term vision of the community, and people should participate in a constructive way, so that when it's all done, they look at themselves and say, this is great. We had a great experience. Now it's even better.
Alex, why don't you give us the last word here? Everyone just kind of went around the horn with a quick executive summary. What are your thoughts as we conclude this conversation?
Well, I would say Michigan's a great state. There's a lot of growth coming. I think if we all work together, and I will say this, Brent and I are probably not the biggest geniuses in the room, but we have a plan. We're going to move forward. But any suggestions, we're more than open to work with anyone.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Brent, thank you for pulling this squad together.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. We appreciate the chimings in of the president of TA Forsberg, Brent Forsberg, Chief Operating Officer for LEAP, Keith Lambert, Secretary Treasurer for Michigan Laborers District Council, Alex Zurek, and from Richmond Capital, the Vice President of Investor Relations, Mike Ibarra. Thanks for talking about this really important topic, and I thank our listeners for hanging in for our first two-part episode.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.